Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. I want to welcome all ambassadors for peace, all community and faith leaders, and the ladies and gentlemen. I am Tomiko Dagan, Senior Vice President of UPF USA, and I want to thank you and welcoming. This is the first virtual IAPD Peace Forum, which is a focus on the importance of interfaith cooperation in building a culture of peace. IAPD is an acronym of Interreligious Association for Peace and Development, a project of the Universal Peace Federation. UPF is an NGO in general consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the UN. UPF recognizes the unique and vital role that religions are called to play in bringing about a world of lasting peace. Throughout the human history, religions have served as a moral compass in educating people to serve and love others, and in providing a vision and rules for a good society. However, we also recognize that efforts of the religious faithful communities have often fallen short. And too often, we witnessed the heartbreaking ordeals caused by religious conflict. Today, our panelists will share their insights into the process of reconciliation and peace building, their thoughts and wisdom on how the interfaith leaders and communities can play a role in building a culture of peace. I would now like to invite today's program moderator, Archbishop George Augustus Stallings Jr., the founder and the spiritual leader of the Imani Temple, African American Catholic Congregation, and our national chairman of IAPD. Let us welcome Archbishop Stallings Jr. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tomiko Duggan, who is the great Vice President of the Universal Peace Federation and who has played an indispensable role in our weekly gatherings of faith, spiritual leaders from the Abrahamic faiths, from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam on our Thursday weekly interfaith prayer service of the IAPD. Now we're having this great IAPD Peace Forum. And we have these great presenters that I am so excited about. And I know that you are going to enjoy listening to them because they will bring us an awesome, powerful message. Our first presenter today is a person who has appeared on our weekly broadcast for our interfaith prayer service, all the way from the city of peace, from Jerusalem, our beloved brother, Rabbi Yaakov Luft, who is a lecturer for Jewish philosophy and is working in the education of Jewish communities in Europe. He is a senior member of the Jerusalem Forum for Understanding and Cooperation Among Religions, including initiating and hosting numerous events of the forum composed of Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, and other religious leaders, scholars, and engage in peace activities throughout the Middle East. Rabbi Luft is also guiding historical educational tours in Europe. And I don't know how he manages to do all of this from Jerusalem, but he is doing it in a major way. So I'm just so thankful and appreciative of his presence on our IAPD Peace Forum today. So it is my distinct honor and privilege to present to some and to introduce to others all the way from Jerusalem, Rabbi Yaakov Luft. The floor is yours.
Good evening. Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening for all my dear friends around the world, wherever you are. So I want to talk about our region, about the Middle East, in the context of the topic we are talking about tonight. This is a complicated and difficult area in all the aspects, which is where the free monotheistic religions were born. It is so ethnical and religiously diverse region. The region suffered from power struggles between the representatives of the major religions, especially Islam and Christianity. This is the area to which the Crusaders went to liberate him from the Muslims. And this is the area where the Muslims declared jihad against Christians infidels. The Jewish have always been in the middle among the great forces that control the area. So the language of the great players in the area was the language of power. Unfortunately, this is also true today. The area bleeds because of incensed wars, because of religion fanatism. The immense power of religion is used to cause suffering, and death instead of peace and love. The religious leaders in the area have a lot of power, but also quite a few dangers. According to the religious leaders, they have an impact, but at the same time, they may fall victims of fanatical forces, and the religious leader would talk about peace and compromise, may suffer from those who think what the more radical the religious leader is, the more righteous and more fightfully represents the word of God. The sermon of a religious leader in his community has a great impact, and he can change the world. But unfortunately, the religious leaders do not always choose to the messengers of peace and love. Many people and governments have tried to bring peace to our region, but they have often failed. Why? Maybe because they spoke in a language what is understood in Western secular society, but not appropriate for an area where the religion has a huge impact on social life. So precisely the Muslim countries in which there was an attempt of secular nationalist rule, which does not take into account the religious matter, have totally failed and caused much suffering. It happened in Iraq in the time of Saddam Hussein. It was a socialist and a secular. It's happened in Syria right now, and for the last many years under Assad, father and son, and Egypt from the times of Nasser and until now. On the other hand, in countries where instead of denying the religious component, religious leaders have changed a paradigm from a militant religion towards a religion of peace. We see welcome change. It happened in, for example, now in the United Arab Emirates, and we see the beginnings that start now in Saudi Arabia. So the unmediated encounters between humans make us realize what we have much more in common than the separator. This is what is happening now between Israelis who come to Dubai, and the Dubai people, Dubai citizens, will suddenly walk around in their traditional clothes in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. It's really a time of Messiah. In my opinion, it is impossible to change the mind of the people in the Middle Eastern countries without changing the religious language. Changing the religious language to a language of peace instead of a language of jihad will bring about a change of consciousness, the understanding what not only my religion is the word, the true word of God, but also the religions of my neighbors come from the divine root. It will change the world view of the believers about their neighbors. Only then will the understanding come that there is more than one path to God. Meetings of religious leaders from different religions convey a message to the believers, to the people, that dialogue is possible and is possible without guns and tanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yaakov Luft. Thank you for reminding us, Toda. Thank you for reminding us that of the complexities associated with establishing peace in the Middle East, but also reminding us of the importance of the religious leadership in the region. And that is possible if we can come together and share our commonalities and really work in tandem, in unity, to bring about peace in the Middle East. Peace in the Middle East is not just a dream. It will come true one day. And we know that you will play a very significant role in that process. Our next speaker is closer to home, not all the way over in the Middle East, but right here in Washington, D.C. I say closer to home because I'm in Washington, D.C., and several of you are in our nation's capital of the United States of America. He is Dr. Alex Cromwell, a distinguished educator, trainer, researcher, and most importantly, a peacemaker. He has taught over 40 courses across 3 universities on topics such as peace building and conflict resolution, international intervention, youth and conflict, cross-cultural communication, and capacity building. Dr. Cromwell is currently a professorial lecturer at the Elliott School of International Affairs at the renowned George Washington University. He has over 10 years of experience training youth in leadership and conflict resolution, and has worked with groups from the Middle East, South and Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, and the United States. His research focuses on conflict contexts and has been published in various academic journals. And he received his PhD in conflict resolution from George Washington University. So I believe if there's anyone qualified to talk about conflict resolution, it is Dr. Alex Cromwell. The floor is yours, my beloved brother.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Stallings. I don't think I've ever had quite as good of an introduction. So thank you for hyping me up.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you to Rabbi Luft and everyone else. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. As Archbishop Stallings mentioned, I've spent the last 10 years or so studying conflict resolution and peace building, and also doing work with youth. And so my big kind of focus is, working in youth encounter programs and thinking about what it means to try to bring youth together across conflict differences to transform how they view each other. Now, the title of the session obviously has to do with building a culture of peace. And so, the goal of peace education is to build a culture of peace. And the assumption embedded in that goal, right, is that the current world we live in is based on, norms of violence, right? We have violence normalized through the media and through our history and through various kind of parts of our society. And so today I'm really going to be focusing on thinking about, in violent conflict contexts, the most important challenge to a culture of peace, which is the dehumanization, right, of our enemies, of people across group differences. And often the way that plays out, right, is along religious lines. Rabbi Luft gave multiple examples, right, of some of the religious differences that create conflict in the Middle East and around the world. And so what I really would like to talk about is the power that encounter programs can have, especially with youth, when we bring them together across differences, when we bring them together across, right, these religious differences or other differences, and help them to see the humanity of the other. And so I have a few quotes I wanted to start with, and then I'm going to talk a bit about some of my research that I've done in Pakistan that looks at the power of these programs. And I have a few, I'm going to draw from some experiences the youth have had in these situations. So the quotes I like to draw from the first one is from Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a famous Buddhist monk and peacemaker from Vietnam. And he says, "How can we love our enemy? The only way is to understand them, to understand how they have come to be the way they are." And Mother Teresa once said, "We are all capable of good and evil. We are not born bad. Everybody has something good inside. Some hide it, some neglect it, but it is there." So the power of encounters, right, of meeting the people that we've been socialized to believe are our enemy, the power is that we start to see that they're not so different from us, right? And as Rabbi Luft was talking about, right, when religion is used in a way that it narrows our view, that it makes us think that we're fundamentally different from each other, is when there's a problem. But religion can also be used in ways, right, to completely transform how we view the other, when we see the humanity in them and when we see God in them. And so what I'd like to draw from, I'm going to discuss my experiences speaking with Pakistani youth who attended 4 different programs that brought them to the US. And just to give a bit more context on Pakistan, there's the most relevant conflicts there are there's a big Shia-Sunni divide, and there's also very strong anti-Americanism, which leads to strong anti-Jewish sentiment, but also anti-Christian sentiment as well. And so the examples I'm going to draw from highlight experiences of 3 different youth when they came to the US, and how they had interactions with others that were different from them, and how it completely transformed their perceptions. So the first person I'd like to speak about, he came to the US in 2011 on a 1-month program, and he lived with a host family, and his host mom was Catholic. And so the story he tells here in the quote I'm about to read is about his experience going to mass with his Catholic host mother, and how it transformed his view of Catholics and Christians in general, and basically anyone who was not a Muslim. So here's the quote. He says, "I went to a Catholic mass with my host family, and during one of the prayers, I could hear my host mom crying while she was praying. And even then, in my experience being brought up as a Muslim in Pakistan, it was ingrained in me that if you're not a Muslim, you're going to hell. You're not going to heaven. My host mother was one of the most kind people that I have met in my life. And while I was standing there in that church, and I could hear her praying to God and crying, praying about her son and husband and crying, I made a decision that I was 100% sure that she was never going to hell. Based on how well I knew God, and based on the natural feeling I had about what God really was, I made a decision that this woman could not go to hell." And that has had a really deep impact on my life since then, because I've stopped interpreting religion based on what is written in the books and what is being said. And I've started interpreting religion based on what I feel is right. And so it's right. I think I love this example, because I really think it helps. It shows, right, how this really deep human connection and really seeing the power of prayer across other religions, right, can really transform this narrow view, right? Because we know often in religion, right, it's so easy to believe that only our religion is the chosen religion and only we are the chosen people. And when we think that way, right, if we're right, then often that means others are wrong, right? And so one of the big challenges in conflict resolution is, how do we move away from either or thinking? How do we move away from, I'm right and you're wrong, to we're both right, where do we go from here? And so that's one of the really big goals in youth encounter programs. And so I have just 2 more quotes that I like to highlight to kind of show this in a bit more depth. So another participant talked about his experience, again, coming to the United States on the UGrad program. So he spent a semester going to university, and he talked about a very close Jewish friend that he made. So he was Muslim, right? Pakistani youth was Muslim, and a very close Jewish friend that he made, and how it transformed his view as well. So he said, "I made a friend while living in the US, and I was really surprised to find out that he was a Jew. We Muslims, most of the Muslims around the world, we don't really have this appreciation about Jews. When we think about Jews, we think about bad things. I was like, okay, man, this is going to be interesting. And believe me or not, he was the most amazing guy I met in America. That guy, he was a Jew. He was a practicing Jew. But he had so much respect for us, and he gave me so many reasons not to hate a Jew. And now I could never think about saying bad things about Jews. So this is the kind of experience I went through. I became appreciative of diversity more than I would ever think about. I've become a person where I can now adjust with anybody from anywhere in the world. And the final quote, and this quote comes from a young Pakistani woman who came to the U.S. as a high school student on the YES program and spent 10 months going to high school, living in a host family. And she talks about her experiences connecting with students in her school and how that transformed her view, so much so that she is now, in returning to Pakistan, worked across Shia and Sunni differences. She says, there were students at my school who would make racial remarks because there were Somalians and Africans, and then you have white people. So I used to get in arguments with the students who said these racist things. But at the end of the year, the most surprising thing that happened was that we became really good friends. That's the whole aim of interfaith harmony, that you have to negate those stereotypes that you have, that you're fed from the day you're born in a country. Because if your parents or your relatives have not been outside of the nation, or if you've never had exposure, then you're going to just believe what the media is going to feed you. So if you do not take that step and go on that journey, you will never learn what's the true meaning of interfaith harmony. So it really helped me. And after coming back here from the US, when I was in my own school, there were students belonging to Shia sect. And if you just look at everything that's happening now in Pakistan, we're having conflicts between Shias and Sunnis for the past few years. So I formed another society, the same coexist society that I started at my school in the US. And so we're making it more global, and we've done 4 to 5 projects. And even the one I'm working on right now is a short documentary film on interfaith harmony. And so to kind of tie all these stories together, right, what I think these examples show, right, is that we all have the power to work towards a culture of peace across religious differences. And the key really starts in our thinking. Again, connecting back to Rabbi Luft was saying, right, and thinking about what does it mean to be open, first open to someone from a different religious background. What does it mean to actually sit with them, to dialogue with them, to learn from them, and move away from thinking about whether our religion is right or not, and move away from focusing on trying to convince the other person that our religion is right. And thinking about the ideas in our religion that teach empathy, that teach us to see humanity in others and to recognize God in them. And I think the more we're able to do this, the more we'll really be able to, heal some of the divides, similar to the examples I was drawing from these youth, right, who traveled from Pakistan, who met others who were completely different from them, and who went home thinking in a way that they never thought they would think before. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alex Cromwell. Awesome. The beautiful thing about your presentation is that you brought it right home for us, particularly as religious leaders, spiritual leaders, that how to apply conflict, how conflict resolution can bring about healing in our communities. When you said that the best way to love our enemies is by understanding them, that struck right at the core of the issue. We don't take out the time to understand each other and to maybe ask, why does a person believe what he or she espouses? You said we've got to move away from this either or thinking. Perhaps we have to move towards a both and thinking, that we can be inclusive in our thoughts, and the power of prayer that can change all of this. We often hear the expression, prayer changes things. Years ago, I thought about that and I said, yes, prayer changes things, yes, but prayer changes people so that people can change things. And you brought that right home to us today. So thank you for taking time out from your professorial duties at George Washington University to humble yourself to be with us on this IAPD Peace Forum today. We have a very powerful woman who's about to come before us today. I can see her poise already. She is ready, and she's a president, huh? She's the president of MLDPR. You're gonna know what MLDPR is if you listen to what her name is and just attach PR, public relations, to it. Now, is this Marcia or Marcia? How do you pronounce it? Unmute yourself. You still have to unmute yourself at the bottom left. I'm glad I asked you that question first. You see that in your bottom left, that little microphone with a line going through it? There we go.
Okay, technical person difficulties here.
I'm glad I haven't introduced you yet, but I was just making sure I pronounced your first name correctly.
Marcia.
Marcia, that's what I thought. Marcia, and I told you, they have to know what this MLDPR is. Marcia L. Dyson, Public Relations. Okay, she's the president of MLDPR. She is an ordained minister, my beloved sister. Thank you. And she is one of America's most respected civic, social activists and communication specialists. The MLDPR, that public relations firm, is an exclusive national and international consultancy in matters of business development, marketing, political strategies, and social responsibility. Very much needed right now. Reverend Dyson is the founder of the Women's Global Institute, known as the WGI, which is a for-profit entity to enhance the lives of women and men via profitable and purposeful social engagement. WGI is considered by many, listen to this, as the United Nations outside of the United States. So let us receive now the distinguished president of MLDPR, the Reverend Marcia L. Dyson.
First, thank you for having me. Tomiko, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I've missed the opportunities to engage as much as I would. And thank you, Reverend Stallings, for that very warm and welcoming acknowledgement of myself. And the reason why I accepted to talk today is because I'll borrow from the gospel song, Reverend Stallings, if we ever needed the Lord, by whatever name we call the Lord, depending upon our relationship to our religion or our faith, we do need the Lord now. And I have this kind of tease out, you know, I got jokes, Professor Cromwell, I think I believe, where were you with all that conflict this past summer with politics? I digress. But I kind of thought about that. We really needed you on the streets to have that conflict resolution we needed through our political parties this summer, which was an international embarrassment, as well as to see our children pour out into the streets with the Black Lives Matter conflict. And I want to say hello to the officer, I can't see your name right now, from the Baltimore Police Department, because what I'm going to preface a little bit later on is that I support you, and I believe that the police officers of this nation are here to respond to the violence which is not tamed by peacemakers such as ourselves, those people who have not had the opportunity to have that moment to sit with themselves and look at humanity as we here on this panel may have done, and become part of that humanity because of maybe not the religious leadership that is needed or the political leadership that is a mandate, have tarnished the golden tenets of the sacred text to which we all hold sacred ourselves and our lives. Now, the United Nations, since the topic is the culture of peace, I said, well, let me go to the headquarters and see what they say. How are they defining this, right? And how do I apply this to my everyday life and my international work, which has taken me to the Caribbean, Latin America, the continent of Africa, and lately a lot in the Middle East. The culture of peace is a set of values, attitudes, modes of behavior, and ways of life that reject violence and prevent conflicts by tackling their root causes to solve problems through dialogue and negotiation and between groups and nations. And for me, the operative word is the root, right? Oftentimes we are reactionary to things that happen in our lives, whether it's through communities, through individuals, and surely through the leaders of the world, because we don't have the root of the problem. You know, some people say, I wish I could go back in the day. Now, I was born in 1951, and I go back in the day as a Black woman, grew up in the city of Chicago and extreme poverty. There was no peace for me, my family, or my community. So I decided to go back to the Bible to look for peace. And then it troubled me, Reverend Stallings, because at the very initial story in Genesis, when there was no racial conflict, there was no religious conflict, there were no gender wars, there were no fraternities or sororities, you know, fighting each other. There were two brothers named Cain and Abel, right? The same family, the world family was all one. And Cain killed Abel. And I was sort of heartened by that, because I'm saying, if at the beginning of time, when there were no social construction identity of who we are, who creates more division amongst us next to our religious beliefs and how they're played out by religious leaders, it left me in an hour, which I would call, like Mother Teresa, the midnight hour of my soul. But then I thought about the hope that transgressed with individuals like us, who do not only use our words or our writings to bring the message across of peace on earth and goodwill to men, that we have allowed ourselves, in my estimation and in my life, to become that living epistle read of men. We know that we tell our children, or we talk about children in parenting, they don't listen to what you say, they listen to what you do. And so it's incumbent upon any leadership, whether they're religious leader, political leader, social leader, whatever that leadership is, to have the morals that provide for the culture of peace. We have to be, those people of faith have to become the visible tentacles of an invisible God. If we're stuck into the Old Testament, which is encompassed mostly by the Jewish faith, then we know that there are 10 commandments. To me, that is not conditional love, because God says, if you do this, I'm going to wipe you out. Now, my mother was a better example of my understanding as a child of God, because nothing that I would do as a child or adult would my mother ever have a commandment that she would leave me or forsake me. I'm being a little bit facetious here to let you know some of the problems at hand. We live in a society where our youth around the world are informed more by reality shows than by religion. We live in a culture that is pervasive called cancel culture. And why do we cancel? Because at the root of the problem, we really don't know each other. In my time in the Middle East, I'm on the border of Lebanon and Syria during conflict. So I can understand what that world was like. And in that conflict, it reminded me of the conflict outside of the Middle East, to the state of the Midwest, Illinois, and the city of my hometown, Chicago. I could not see any difference from North and South Sudan, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, right? The conflict among the Congo, the DRC, then the south side and west side of Chicago, when selectively during a Black Lives Matter movement officer, that selectively they forgot about the Black police. And I said, well, that's kind of selective of you, right? So how do we have this conflict even within one's own demographic group called race, in one's religious orders called their faith, the gender realities called my biology? Because I tell my sisters, friends, your biology, your genitalia, does not dictate your moral character, your values, or your respect for others. That is something that has gone deeper than this outward external expression called me, or you, or I, or he, she, or her. I remember reading, and I love Elie Wiesel, who says, whenever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. That drives me, because people often, why are you over there? My grandchildren say, why are you over there? Because I know that the welfare of children who have the absence of the age of innocence, growing up in a war-torn land that don't know about dolls or toys and school or beautiful moments, or the age of trial and error, will become a terrorist, not because he's born a terrorist, it's because there has nothing there in his life to inform them of a different world. We read about young girls in Nigeria and Kenya being put bombs on the chest of their vest and walking into a marketplace told that they're going to meet their mothers by men who use their religion to make them think that heaven was nearby. So this is a great work that we're doing. And when it comes to the children, I consider myself a cultural diplomat because through cultural diplomacy, I can change the mindsets of people, not through my words, but allowing them to experience the world differently. Some examples just recently was taking a delegation of women from every lifestyle, most of them were wealthy, to the country of Qatar. Now, these women have traveled all over the world in a very luxurious situation, but they went there as guests of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it wasn't about the luxury that was provided for us. They learned Arabic, they went to a mosque, they sat down in the meals and the customs of that particular state republic, they wore the dress that the women there dressed, and they had a chance to interact with the people of that land. They didn't need any CIA agency or State Department briefs. They went there and experienced that moment, that culture, that Middle East that I knew for myself that we can only do about experience. So what I also like to say is that another cultural experience, because I was so concerned about children, that I joined one of my beautiful young friends and mentees who is from Ethiopia, who took over the International Children's Festival. There were children in the district of the nation's capital who had never crossed the quadrants. So we had this festival and all the agencies, the embassies, 30 of them came and they put up professional booths and the children got a chance to put on those national clothing. They ate their food. They saw prestigious entertainment so they could grasp that culture and the beauty of the diversity of other lands. And they had a passport. We took their photos, we put their names on it, and every time they went to a kiosk of that independent embassy, the embassy representative stamped it, and that child became a global citizen. But more importantly, the mothers and the fathers or the aunts and uncles or older siblings who brought those children there were educated about the world themselves. And I saw them asking those questions that were never presented to them in their classroom, that would never allow this world to be spread out, to see this globe, not as a ball, but not as soil or topography, but as a humanity. And so for me, we have to become the moral compass. We must be the examples. We must be those representations of a visible God in the lives of people who render God invisible because of the actions of people of faith, people who are political leaders, people who are social activists, put the I, them before the Almighty God that they know without even saying the words, because often people don't know that I'm an ordained minister. I don't usually say I'm an ordained minister because I'm too Southside Chicago and I cuss a lot and I don't want to give Jesus a bad name. I'm keeping it real. I've also said the Shahada in Morocco, so I'm also Muslim, known as Manura in the Middle East. In Africa, in Nigeria, I'm at Asina. But no matter where I am, because I want to be like Paul, wherever I am, I want to be able to meet the people like Jesus did the woman at the well, so that I tell them things about themselves, because at the root of it all, they've never been told who their real humanity was. Thank you.
Wow. All I can say is wow. Reverend Marcia L. Dyson, what an impassioned message. Hard-hitting, didn't leave one stone unturned, did not spare anyone, none of us in that presentation. You are causing all of us to look at the man or the woman in the mirror. And that message that it all talks about faith in action. I really heard you speaking or articulating what it means to put our faith, our belief system into action, and to understand that each one of us is a visible manifestation of the invisible God, and that God resides in us and that God dwells in us, and God is using us to make this world a better place. I see why you're in public relations. You have me sitting on the edge of my seat. In fact, I'm still on the edge. you, and then the way you wove in what, Rabbi Luft, Dr. Cromwell and Dr. Cromwell wove in Rabbi Luft, all of you are just interconnected. We're intersecting in a very beautiful way. this was providential. This is not by happenstance or accident that any one of us, particularly our panelists, is on this broadcast, but it is because each one of us is a visible manifestation of God, and we were meant to be here on this as part of this virtual panel forum, this peace forum today. Thanks again, my beloved sister. It's a great segue. What you said is a great segue to present a very distinguished African-American police officer. He is Captain Orlando D. Lilly, who is the commander of Youth Community Services Section and Recruitment of the Police Department in Towson, Maryland. He has been a captain in the Baltimore County, that's in Maryland, the Baltimore County Police Department, where he has served with distinction for 26 years. Wow, that's a long time, isn't it? For 26 years. I don't know how a man of his caliber can withstand being a police officer for 26 years and still be in his right mind, but he is. He is currently, as I said, the commander for the Youth Community Services Section. And not only that, he wears another hat. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Baltimore in the Forensic Science Department at the University of Baltimore, as I said. And he also, listen, I don't understand this, Captain Lilly, you're gonna have to explain this particular subject. He teaches math application in law enforcement. Dr. Cromwell, do you know what that is? Teaches math application in law enforcement, as well as he teaches at the Community College of Baltimore County in the Department of Ethics and Diversity in the Criminal Justice Department. What an awesome man. He holds a Master of Science degree in management from Johns Hopkins University. And he's also, listen to this, Reverend Dyson, he too is an ordained minister. He is an associate minister at the renowned New Psalmist Baptist Church in Baltimore, where a close friend of mine, Dr. Thomas, is the pastor. And he is the former president and the sitting board member of the Blue Guardians that represent minority officers' interests within the police department. And he's also a graduate of the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, National Academy, Session 268. In addition, if that were not enough, he is a veteran of the United States Army, and he currently resides in Ellicott City, Maryland, a great place where I go to look for antiques, Captain Lilly. He and his wife, their 2 children, and he also talks about his famous dog, Amber, that brings the humane side to. I present to some and introduce to others, our beloved and esteemed brother, Captain Orlando D. Lilly. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So giving honor, first of all, to God, to Archbishop Stallings, the Vice President Dugan, to this esteemed panel that you brought, that I right here trying to feverishly write notes as they are talking at the same time. And Reverend Dyson, thank you so much for the shout out yourself. I just bought your husband's book yesterday, so I'm looking forward to reading that as well. And more than anything, first of all, I'm gonna tell Archbishop, never again put me behind somebody that I gotta come behind and then try to do my best behind that. I don't want that anymore, but I appreciate you. So I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my past, and I like sometimes when we hear the resumes of accolades and success that people have had, but we all know that there's a story behind that, right? And so me being a product of a family where my parents were divorced at a very young age and took a turbulent turn for myself for a little while, where I ended up in the hospital because I was stabbed and end up having to have 32 stitches in, 32 stitches out, had to cauterize my nerves in my arm, and had taken me a whole year to learn how to use my arm again. I had a plethora of aunts and uncles on my mother's side. There's 16, on my father's there's 14, and everybody had committed that I was going to be in jail or dead by the time that I was 16 years of age. But so be it that God would use a moment as that that death moment. I didn't understand at that time that I was dying, but because I just felt real sleepy. But I remember a police officer crying. I was 10 years old. A police officer was crying, and that was the first time where I saw compassion from a man. And I can remember being on that bed, and at the time I didn't know what had hit me, but something in me said that if I lived to get old, I was going to do the job that he did. Now I understand that that was a whisper in my ear about the moment that looked like a tragedy, but were really a breakthrough. And that police officer kept his hands on my life. And if you show me a picture of him right now, Archbishop Stallings, I couldn't tell you. All I know, he was an old and gray bald man, but I know he shed tears that day. He stayed in touch with my mother, who's also a preacher, and that changed the trajectory of my life. So much so that, you know, when I became of age and I was old enough to do what I wanted to do, and I can remember telling my parents when I was in college that I was going to be a police officer, and I can remember the stern look on my father's face, because this was the last thing that he wanted me to do, based on his own personal experiences. But I can remember my brother and I saying to him that if we don't go and learn how to change it from the inside, then there'll never be changes. And so that moves me in a place where we talk about, from my brother from Israel, where he talks about the Middle East, and then we talk about the scholar with conflict. And then I hear from Reverend Dyson about her travels around the world as it deals with the young people of the world that we're looking to change, and how we get caught up under this auspice of titles, and particularly as it relates to religion. And so what I offer out for your suggestion anyway is that we all consider, how often do we get caught up in the context of the religious rituals as opposed to the tenets of the practice? And so those are the things that sometimes have a tendency to get us hang up. And so when I think about it in peace, and particularly as it relates to this profession. When we talk about it, you know, I have to always keep in my head teachings that I get from either my own pastor, Reverend Bishop Thomas, or my own theological training. When we think about that word peace, and some theological scholars suggest that it means completeness or soundness. And in other words, it's the ideal relationship with our brothers and sisters, right? And so there's a quote that Albert Einstein uses, and he says that nothing truly valuable can be achieved except by the unselfish cooperation of many individuals. And so when we think about that whole context of peace as it relates to this work, we think about it in two systems. One of them is the complicated system, right? That's when we think about the mechanics of a factory or a machine. But the truth of it is, it really lies up under the umbrella of the same thing that we think about with the various religions, of a much more complex system, one that actually deals with societies and ecosystems. And we think about those nonlinear connections that they have, where we can think about the tiniest change can cause a chain reaction. And so you can't really predict them, you can't really control them. But because of the speed of technology now, things move so quickly and swiftly. But the key to it becomes how adaptable and resilient we are in the process, right? And so Albert Einstein also says that 100 times a day, he reminds himself that the inner and the outer life depends on the labor of others, the living and the dead, and that I must exert myself to give in the same measure that I have received and am still receiving. When we think about peace and we think about it in the religious context, we all would not be here if our maker, who created the heavens and the earth, thought enough of each one of us individually that one of us need to be here. That somebody like Orlando Lilly needed to be here on this earth. Somebody like Orlando Lilly needed to be here in this profession. And so when we think about the profession as a whole, particularly as we think about the social unrest, we think about the Black Lives Movement, we think about people now saying, okay, well, all lives matter. People says blue lives matter. But one of the things that I've had a conversation with my colleagues was to remind them this: blue lives was a choice. Black lives was not for me. Of anybody, of any color, of any place, of any sex. These things weren't choices that we got to make on our own. And so when you take an oath, because I always ask people, under the 26 years, and Archbishop Stallings, you made the statement, you said, you don't know how I kept my sanity. Of course you do, because it's always God, right? And so the reality of it is, once a month, I intentionally make myself go read my oath. At no point in time does my oath say good or bad. It says preserve justice to all, right? Fairly and equitably as much as possible. So there has to be what I consider to be this shared level of consciousness, and then this empowered ability to execute it. And that has to be an educational process. When we talk about training, you know, I use the word purposely about education. When we think about education, education is a journey. You never reach that end point of it. It is an ongoing process. And so many times we get a lot of things about the training that we have, but what I'm now say to a lot of my peers, and as I go out to communities, and as particularly as this George Floyd incident happened over the summer, I've gone to over 80 community meetings that I initiated on my own, many of them on my own time, because what I realized was that oftentimes we miss the very thing that God expects of us, and that is to be in the position of listening. From date of birth, you'll talk about how your presentation or your first presentation is everything. It's the thing that people grab onto the best, but nobody really teaches you to listen. And this is why I joke a lot of time, Reverend Dyson, that women listen better. This is why they can pay attention to the most smallest of things that we miss, that I learned over the years as a trained investigator. And I laugh because I told my wife, I said, it has taken me 26 years to learn what she learned how to do at birth. And that was to listen, right? And so when we're talking about peace, it falls under this context. It moved from us transferring our understanding of how do we actively engage in peace. What I like saying through this whole hermeneutic loop, from the organizational context to an individual context to a social context. When we think about the organization, why does the police exist, right? We use the word, and Reverend Dyson said it, and I wrote it down, so I'm good because I felt like, okay, God, I'm on the right track. When we talked about the UN using peacekeepers, right? That's a term that we would use interchangeably with law enforcement from time to time. And think about me, how quick I went back to the law enforcement, right? Words matter. So when we think about why am I here, this is a service business. It is the service business where I can enter the community of my Jewish brothers and sisters. It is the business that I run into my Muslim brothers and sisters, those who are Sikh and otherwise. And these are all the places that I've intentionally have visited on my own, because what we all understand that there's these common tenets that we all share no matter what our religion is. But then when you get on this job, these are the things that we need to remember out of those three things that I told you when I talked about the organizational context, the individual context, and the social context. The individual context. Whoever I was before I got here, I did not shed that in my 28 weeks of training. Whatever I learned from my home, what we would say in the academic world, the egocentric self and the sociocentric self, those are the people that I still am. I'm still that person. And these aren't talking about two different people. These are talking about the context of how I treat people. And so Reverend Dyson had said something else earlier, and I wanted to connect with the fact that our brains are much more like computers, the RAM part of the computers. And what it does is whenever we go put in a search word in a search engine, it goes and search to go find where it's already there. Well, it's the same dynamic when we're dealing with human beings. And if the only thing that I know about my Jewish brothers and sisters is, oh, they only hanging out in the Old Testament part, but they're talking about God, then that's my hang up. It's not my brothers and sisters hang up, but I had to be taught that, right? And so for those of us who have theological training, we know that when you go to seminary, you get all the opportunity to be exposed to all of the religions, and then you make the decision about the track that you're going to run down after that, right? So that you understand that they're valuable in all the tenets. But then when we come here, how now do I move that, what I got from my individual context into my social context? How I'm dealing with my brothers and sisters when I go on this call, and I get this call repeatedly. These are the experiences that we're asking them to do. And oftentimes what the public doesn't know is you can get so common used to trauma, being introduced to trauma. My last call before I made my first supervisory rank many years ago, I get a call, and all of us hate these calls because we know it's not good. I worked the midnight shift. I got off at 6 o'clock. This call came in at 5:30 in the morning. And I said to myself, okay, this is not going to be good. We get to the call, and when I get to the call, a young girl ran next door, and she said a monster did something to her mommy. We go inside the location, and excuse the graphic description, but I have to do it to get the effect that I need. She was almost decapitated. She was pregnant. If we'd got there 5 minutes sooner, we could have probably saved the baby. We couldn't save her, right? Imagine constantly being introduced to that over the years of your life. And then the next day, you get a call for a noise complaint. And then you get the call where two neighbors are arguing. And then you get the call of the robbery. The psychology that occurs within that doesn't then allow people to connect with the piece of them that understand that people are going through something, but through it all, peace prevails. It is the intrapersonal skill, the ability to manage oneself or one's internal peace, right? And so oftentimes now law enforcement are realizing that we need to add this wellness component so that we can teach officers how to manage their internal peace. These are things that dynamically we have not done over the years, but then it becomes this whole piece. Okay, manage your internal peace to the self-discipline, the honesty, the integrity, and self-awareness that then moves to the external part of that, which is that interpersonal skills that I need, the ability to deal with other people or their external peace. How do I encompassate that? And all of that is intertwined and connected to this piece where I talk about the educational piece, right? So the kid who was picked to go to jail one day had an experience that brought me to God, that then transformed into the fact of pursue me, pursue the wisdom and knowledge that I have to offer you, right? Because then we start to realize at that moment that just as much as education is a journey, so is this pursuit of wisdom. And then as wisdom becomes much more profound in the way that we walk in our Christian walk, particularly for myself, then this peace thing becomes something that I can actively do with a level of vigor and compassion every day for 26, because the 26 years don't feel like 26 years to me. Every day I wake up is the new day of the assignment that he has given me. Right. And so as I deal with the young, I'm also chairing this racial and ethnic disparities that relates with youth, particularly the black and brown children, to prevent their process in the system. How do we get them to stop being part of that system? And that goes back to Dr. Cromwell's piece about conflict, right? Because when we're looking at people at that age, they do not have the lexicon to be able to communicate what's going on with them. And so if I'm treating the 10-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 15-year-old like someone who's in their 20s, who have not fully matured, because the brain doesn't fully mature till you're about 26-year-old. And notice I said the brain, because some of us as adults don't mature until much later than that, right? And so now when we're dealing with all these things, we're understanding this comes from the place of our families, our extended families, our neighborhoods, our communities. And so the great opportunity that I have as a commander of community outreach is, hey, I get to oversee our whole chaplaincy program, and we all talk, and they come from all walks of faith, because we want to make sure that it is an inclusive environment to understand what that means to be an inclusive environment, where we understand that if peace is the umbrella, it is an inclusive environment, right? And so that ultimately means that we have to get to the place where we lead like the gardener as opposed to the chess master. And so in that whole pretext, there's something that I'll come to a close, is that we understand that we need to ask ourselves this, one of these things. Are we progressing or are we growing? Living example is this. Orlando Lilly was able to make it to captain. That's progress. But growth would be, have I learned how to wield the authority and power that God has given me to make sure that I'm making life better for somebody else, preserving somebody else's sanity in the context of peace. And so that comes about along with awareness, action, and accountability. Because the truth is, many people can communicate peace, but few can connect to peace. And so I'll end with this. There's something I remind myself when I think of the word peace in the way of an acronym. The first word is prayer. The first word is prayer. The E is for every day. And the A is for always showing care for each other without ceasing. I thank you all for so much of this opportunity. But as a police officer, I understood that who I was before I came. And so when I look at this profession, I look at what I bring to it and the opportunity that it provides me to be able to serve and to lay peace at the foundation of other people's feet.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Officer Orlando Lilly. You know, we talk about a poster boy. Well, you're the postal police officer that we need to have in all of our communities. You use the words adaptable and resilient. You are the epitome of that. How adaptable you are to this situation, how you shared your personal testimonies, your stories, and how you are so resilient in the midst of what you do. And I thank God that you were anointed, appointed, and approved for ordained ministry, like Reverend Dyson, like Reverend Dr. Jenkins, some of us who can bring our understanding of our relationship to the Creator to bear on what we do every day. And your presentation just reminded me that if we could, I'm not making any statements here about other officers, police officers, and their backgrounds, but if they had come to a level of faith experience and their understanding of their relationship, their vertical relationship to God, they could manifest it more powerfully on the horizontal level. Thank you. I needed that. I don't know about anyone else, but I needed to hear that from you. And Reverend Dyson led right into your presentation, and I'm sure she is comforted today in hearing your message as well, even though she can speak for herself because she is a very powerful woman, married to a very powerful man. Yes, indeed, Professor Eric Michael Dyson. Our last panelist is someone with whom I have worked for 20 years. Wow. You know, when Reverend Dyson was talking about when the year in which she was born, I said that woman ought to stop lying. She wasn't born in no 1951 looking as great and youthful as she is right now. So that reminds me of what it's like to work with someone for 20 years and they just always are the same. I'm speaking about none other than the distinguished president, as well as the professor of peace and development at the Unification Theological Seminary in New York City, my brother and friend, Dr. Thomas J. Ward, who prior to being appointed as president of the Unification Theological Seminary in 2019, served as the dean of the University of Bridgeport in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in the Department of Public and International Affairs. He currently has found his calling to be very much associated with peace and development across the globe. For Dr. Ward has worked in the United States as well as Eastern and Western Europe, Latin America, Japan, Korea, and also in the Philippines. And he began his career as a political and economic analyst for the division of PNC, a bank that we all know, and then later for the Bank of America, especially focusing on programs for the developing world. And he met the unification movement in France in 1971. And after 8 years as a church worker, he entered the Unification Theological Seminary. So trust me, he's an ordained minister as well. He may not, like Reverend Dyson, she says, I don't usually tell people that I'm an ordained minister. And oftentimes Dr. Ward doesn't tell people either. He just does the do. So I'm honored to present to you a very committed and dedicated servant of God, Dr. Thomas J. Ward. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Archbishop Stallings. And this is a highlight for me. You know, I've known you for more than 20 years, and I've never had a chance to be on a committee with you.
That's
20
true.
years. So this is really a privilege, and I feel like I finally made it, Archbishop Stallings. It's
Thank
amazing.
you, Dr. Ward.
So thank you so much for hosting this afternoon's program, and many thanks for each of the incredible presenters that have preceded me. I mean, each of them, we could just have a session on each one of these individuals and their remarkable experiences. So I feel very privileged, honored, and somewhat intimidated to have to speak after all of them. I wanted to express my appreciation to Dr. Thomas Walsh, who is the chairman of Universal Peace Federation, to Dr. Jenkins, and to Senior Vice President Tomoko Duggan, and also to Dr. Michael Kiley, because it was Dr. Kiley and Vice President Duggan that made it possible for me to be part of today's program. So my appreciation to each of them. I'm going to approach today's presentation a little bit differently than everyone else has. I am going to show some slides. I apologize, but I'm like deaf and dumb without slides. I apologize about that. And secondly, I just want to say something about my life experience. I have lived the last almost 50 years around New York City. So the United Nations has been a part of my life. I worked for 7 years. My boss for 7 years was Stoyan Ganev, who was the president of the General Assembly of the United Nations. So I worked with him for 7 years on a day-to-day basis. I worked for more than a decade with Ambassador Jose Maria Chavez, that I know that Taj Hamad is very familiar with. Good to see you, Dr. Hamad. And also, I worked for many years in the area of with something called CETON, the Committee on Teaching About the United Nations. I spent about 7 years there organizing their annual conference about the UN. And I also ran for 20 some years a School of Public and International Affairs, where I had a lot of United Nations employees come through my programs. I think I have there's about 25 people that work on at the UN that I actually had the opportunity to interface as professor student. It was a great experience. So I am going to try to approach this problem a little bit from the perspective of the UN, but hopefully it ties into everything that we've heard up until now. So I'm going to share my screen if that's okay with everybody. So our theme today is interfaith cooperation in building the culture of peace. And culture of peace is a concept which developed in the late it's actually around 1993, but in the late 1990s, it became part of the common language of UNESCO, and from there it likewise went to the United Nations as a whole. The major figure who kind of was behind all that was Federico Mayor. And in New York City, UN Undersecretary General Anwarul Chowdhury, that I know that Dr. Hamad knows very well, my wife knows very well, and I've had a chance also to work with on a few things over the years, has also played a very important role in the promotion of the culture of peace. And also Dr. David Adams, who was responsible for oversight of all the activities during UNESCO's Year of Culture of Peace, which took place back in 1999. And he's still very much involved in what are called City of Peace initiatives. And I had a Fulbright student a few years back who was invited to participate in the City of Peace initiative in New Haven, where Dr. Adams is located. Don't need to repeat the culture of peace definition because Reverend Dyson already covered that. And there are 8 action areas within the culture of peace that are typically referenced. And also, there's not enough time to really go into detail with that, so I'm not going to do that either. I want instead to focus upon the preamble of the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, known as UNESCO, which says, it opens by saying, the governments of the states parties to this constitution on behalf of their peoples declare that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So very appropriate, I think, to what we've been touching upon this afternoon. And similar to the observation by Mohandas Gandhi, A man is but the product of his thoughts. What he thinks, he becomes. The preamble goes on to say the ignorance of each other's ways and lives has been a common cause throughout the history of mankind or humankind, of that suspicion and mistrust between the peoples of the world through which their differences have all too often broken into war. And religion, I think we believe, can play an important role in trying to address this. And I'd like to talk specifically about the ways in which I believe that it can do that. Faith has the capacity to be expressed in action. And particularly, we know that through his process of direct action, Dr. Martin Luther King took many of the principles that came from Mohandas Gandhi, but applied them in a Christian context. But I turn your attention to the photo on the right here, because I think this is probably the most important lesson that we have to all learn from Dr. King. As he prepared his nonviolent demonstrations over the years, it's my understanding that he told those who prepared to join him, tomorrow, we're going to face some very difficult things. You may be beaten. You may be attacked by a dog. You may be hosed. And you have to ask yourself, are you prepared to go out and face those things and not lose it? Because if you're going to lose it, I don't want you there. I don't want you there. You will undermine our cause. We have to do this with dignity in spite of all types of adversity. And we have to do this in such a way that it's completely nonviolent if we're going to be effective in sending our message. And what he foresaw is what came to pass when they undertook those actions. They went through, we know, all different types of things in those years of the 1950s and early 1960s as the civil rights movement began to become mainstream in the United States. The amazing thing is faith based upon action leads to a change of self. Those leaders have, so many of those civil rights leaders have shaped the future of the United States. They have played a defining role in the direction of the United States. And the reason is because of going through the kinds of things that they did. By facing that kind of adversity, they recognized, I can do this. I can go through this. I can face persecution. I can face rejection. I can face all types of things, and I can continue to smile. I can continue to go forward in this way. They changed. Their faith inspired their actions, and their actions transformed their spirit. It was that process, if you will, the powerful role that was played by faith, the powerful role played by religion in effecting this type of change. So UNESCO is speaking about a theory. I will read it this time. The culture of peace is a set of values, attitudes, modes of behavior, and ways of life that reject violence and prevent conflicts by tackling their root causes to solve problems through dialogue and negotiation among individuals, groups, and nations. That's fine. But what the people that we see in these photos went through, it was not theory. It was practice. It was practice. They changed themselves, they changed America, and they show the way for us to be able to change the world. Faith, action, transformation of self. That since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And what's the best way to do that? Well, certainly Dr. King showed us that what inspired him to be able to change his mind and the minds of others was faith. Faith led him to take action and effected a change of self. It's not the theory of UNESCO. It's the reality of human beings who acted upon their faith, stood up, effected change, and in the process also changed themselves. August 18th, 2000, Father and Mother Moon made a proposal for the creation of an interreligious council within the United Nations itself. I just want to share his words. He says, the existing United Nations structure composed of national representatives may be regarded as a Congress where the interests of each member nation are represented. However, I submit that serious consideration should be given to forming a religious assembly or council of religious representatives within the structure of the United Nations. This assembly or council would consist of respected spiritual leaders in fields such as religion, culture, and education, such as the people that sit on today's panel. Of course, the members of this interreligious assembly will need to have demonstrated an ability to transcend the limited interest of individual nations and to speak for the concerns of the entire world and community at large. The two chambers, a religious chamber and a political chamber, working together in mutual respect and cooperation, will be able to make great advances in ushering in a world of peace. The wisdom and vision of great religious leaders will substantially supplement the political insight, experience, and skill of the world's political leaders. I believe that there is one example that I can point to, and I'm sure you all can point to many others, about the reality of the potential of this type of council. And I can point to a specific UPF example of the impact of interreligious collaboration, an example that's already been in place for 35 years. I'm talking about religious youth services. This was a project that Reverend and Mrs. Moon began in 1985. And the idea was to bring together people from different faiths to go to different parts of the world with specific needs. Maybe one place didn't have a school, maybe another place lacked a bridge to connect two villages. Maybe someplace else there was a need to build latrines. There were all types of projects that they were engaged in. The director of this project, his name is John Gehring. Right now, I think he's very active in Paraguay with a whole variety of projects down there. But one day I heard him give a testimony about his experience. He said that when he brought together these groups, in the group there would be Muslims, there would be Jews, there would be Christians, there would be Hindus, there would be all types of people. That when he brought them together, as they first began to work maybe over several months together, that at the beginning, all the Hindus were together, all the Jews were together, all the Muslims were together, all the Christians were together. But over a period of several months, he said he always saw a transformation occur. And the transformation that occurred was that the people who were more worldly, whether they were Muslim or Christian or Jew or whatever, they went to one side. And the people who were spiritually guided and inspired by what they were doing because of their faiths, they came closer together among themselves. They crossed their denominations and they came together because there was something beautiful, something invisible that all of them shared that brought them together. That could happen at the United Nations as well. Over the course of history, there has been remarkable interreligious cooperation amongst people across different faiths. Here you have a photo of Dr. Martin Luther King on one of his marches, and beside him is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel. We know that in the early days of the civil rights movement, that more than 50% of the whites who joined those various marches, they were Jews. They had not forgotten what happened with the Holocaust, and they wanted to make sure that they could be able to somehow stand up and share why what was being done, what Blacks had endured for too long in the United States, had to be stopped. Or the lower photo here, you have Mohandas Gandhi and you have Abdul Ghaffar Khan. He was the head of the Kudai Kutmaga, and a remarkable person, a Muslim who practiced nonviolence based upon his own faith, inspired by Gandhi, but based upon his own faith. He was able to put together a group of so-called soldiers who were nonviolent. They carried no arms. They were called the Kudai Kutmaga. And they went from village to village. And they stood up and called upon the Muslims to join in the nonviolent transformation of India, which had been inspired by Gandhi and which was reinforced by Kant. I feel so bad about this man because he passed away. He lived a long life. He passed away in 1988. But just a year or two before his death, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. It would have been so great if he could have been recognized for the incredible, he spent so many years of his life in prison, went through so many difficulties, both under the British, and then also he spent an incredible amount of difficulty inside of Pakistan afterwards. If he could have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, he was from Peshawar, that region between Afghanistan and Pakistan. If he could have been the example because of that, I believe that perhaps the whole area would have taken a different direction. We wouldn't have had to see all of the suffering, the war, the violence that's going on in that area. Of course, I'm a dreamer, but that's my belief is that definitely he deserved to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's a tragedy that he wasn't recognized for taking his faith and showing that within Islam is the path based upon what's called sabra, perseverance. Through perseverance, one can go forward. One does not react with violence. One goes forward silently, sacrificially, consciously, in order to bring about peace ultimately. Thank you all very much. That's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas Ward, for sharing with us the essential principles in building a culture of peace. And I'm sure that a lot of us watching your presentation had a lot of flashbacks all the way back to not only the civil rights movement, but how each one of us has appreciated and also interpreted history in seeking to build a world of true and lasting peace. Such iconic figures as Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, even Abernathy. We saw Reverend Abernathy in that photo, and of course, Mother Teresa. I had the personal pleasure of working with Mother Teresa for a number of years, and I loved what I saw. One of the banners that said, "If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other." And I'm glad that we have remembered that we belong to each other. Thanks again, Dr. Ward. To move this along, we're going to bring on Mr. Bill Stoner, who will facilitate any questions from our viewers and share those questions with us. And perhaps one of the panelists, our distinguished panelists, can respond to those questions. Any questions, Mr. Stoner?
Yes, we do have questions. The first one came in for Reverend Dyson. Someone saw the book that was on the table behind you, and they're asking, does this book, is this your husband's book? Thought you might just describe that.
Since I'm his publicist, yes, this is long times coming, Reckoning with Race in America. This is part of the trilogy, the last book that Michael tries to have basically white America understand the plight of African Americans on the soil of the United States, not after we got off of slave ships, but just in recent history, trying to do what Dr. King did. I consider his text to be a peaceful march toward understanding, getting to the root of the problems of why America has such a great divide, even still, post the civil rights movement that we have today. Also, he looks at the discord between law enforcement and our community in ways in which we can grapple at the same time understanding that these law officers have a job to do and looking at what we do no matter what realm of the world we're in, because we know we have bad ministers, right? Not anybody on this panel. So in all life forms, bad leadership politically, that it's just those few, but want to bring attention to the heartbreaking, wrenching stories in this particular book, our letters, similar to what Mamie Till did when she opened up the casket so the world could see her son, using a Godfather motif, saying, look at what they did to my boy. That he wanted people to see how this impacts the community, even though we did not know those who were falling through this form of demise.
And I would like to highly recommend that we purchase that book by your beloved husband,
Yes.
Michael.
Okay.
He's quite a
Do
prolific
that.
writer. And he's quite a prolific writer. Then he bears the name Michael, which means one who is like God, like
That's
unto
right. Had to remind him though he ain't God. Okay, it's just I had a long day. Thank you.
Mr. Stoner.
We have another question that's for any of the panelists. In times of great turmoil and crisis like we are in today, and that can become worse even in the next year, how do men and women of peace find each other and build a community that yields a moral compass, but does not get caught up in the temporal politics?
Maybe we should call on Captain Orlando Lilly, since he has his feet in all those different areas. What about that, Captain Lilly?
One of the things that I mentioned early when I was talking was this whole piece about shared consciousness, right? And so in that vein, we have to be intentional about what we want to do and the people that we want to be around. And oftentimes that platform of shared consciousness makes that an easy place for us to move into. Because if we don't allow ourselves, what I like calling moving up the blind, let the blind come up. The other thing that goes into place with our neurological pathways. So when you tie your shoes, if I ask any of you right now, do you put your right over left first? You would have to think about it, right? Because you've been doing it this way for so long. You just tie your shoe. You don't know which loop that you do over first because of the neurological pathways. So in order for us to be successful out of that, you need to be conscious cognitively of what are you doing now? Because your energy goes where your focus goes. So if that individual is aware of how easy it is to get sucked in by those divisive things that we think about politically, that's because that's one of their barriers. So you have to be intentional about that in a place of where I talked about the AAA, awareness, action, and accountability.
Maybe thank you, Captain Lilly. Right on the mark. Maybe Dr. Alex Cromwell would like to add something to that, since he's a scholar and an expert in the area of conflict resolution.
Sure. I mean, I think that one of the biggest challenges when it comes to, conflict escalating is the way that we start to think very narrowly, right? And so what happens is when there's conflict, basically we have all these different identities, right? We have our religious identity, racial identity, all these different things. But what happens is all our identities narrow and we suddenly only have one identity. Think about the US, right? As the political divide heightens, right? People are no longer anything else except a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter, for example, right? And so the great challenge is, first of all, how to stop thinking of people only in that way. And the way we do that, of course, is through dialogue. But the other challenge is, we have a tendency to only engage with those who agree with us, right? And we see this on social media, right? We see this in the circles we're involved in. And so kind of the challenge is, how do we consistently engage beyond those boundaries, right? How do we make sure that we're not just confirming what we already believe, but we seek out something that's completely different? So that's all I'll say to that.
Well said. And we can resolve all of this by making love or making music. You almost got a chance to play one of those guitars behind you, Dr. Cromwell. Mr. Stoner, please. I can't say a word.
So we have one question for Captain Lilly. There's one of our viewers wants to know about the youth, and they're saying that middle and high school kids seem lost today. Everything from the social influences and intentional rudderless, directionless quality of the system, and even their own technologies conspire and to alienate them and isolate them. What have you found that works to help even one person find their groove?
Good question. So, and I get this kind of a lot, so this is not new, right? But that means now that we have to take a moment to reflect on us as parents. And for the child like Orlando Lilly, who grew up as the latchkey kid, who had to come home as the older sibling, watch his siblings, my situation is a little bit different. But I still had that level of responsibility as a child to do adult tasks. Well, now what has happened is we have allowed the focus of entertainment and material bribery, i.e. I'm gonna buy you a play PS5, i.e., I'm gonna get you the new phone. And so there's a level of accountability on the parents and guardians that relates to that kind of transition that we're looking for, to go back to the basics. And if we don't do those things, and because children like consistency, and I'll use me for an example again, as opposed to outing anybody else. My mother allowed me and my brother to go stay with our father for a little while because we just felt like she was just such a disciplinarian. My father gave us so much freedom that he never asked to check our homework. He never asked did we finish our homework. And one day I looked at my brother and said, I want to go back and stay with mom. And the reason was because I needed structure. I didn't know that mentally, but I knew something was wrong with nobody ever asking to see my homework. And so children, because they don't have the ability to communicate, and oftentimes when we try to build things from children, with this organization that I'm chairing right now, one of the things I said, I have professors from schools, the DJS, all of these fancy title places, but we didn't have any children. So I said, no, we got to bring some of them in, because we got to quit trying to build it and then ask them to come. It is the equivalent of each one of us who are parents now or responsible for somebody else. They're sick and we decide that we're going to go to the doctor and leave them at home. No, the doctor needs to talk to the patient. And so many times we try to insert ourselves as the patient about what our children need without finding. So to reach that one, first you got to listen to them. The other thing is we have to stop letting the entertainment world, what they see on TV, all these rappers, basketball players, football players, to be the examples that we want them to have, and then quit the material bribery. Quit buying them things. If you got a straight A, that is my expectation of you. You don't get an iPhone for that. So those are some of the things that we kind of think about when we think about those things.
Thank you very much, Captain Lilly. Well, this is going to, it's unfortunate that we have to bring this particular session to a close so that we can receive and hear our final remarks from a great man of God, a dedicated servant who just loves connecting and working with people of all races, of all cultures, of all denominations, of all backgrounds. He is my younger brother, but I feel like he's my elder brother because I'm always following him in leadership throughout the organization. I'm trying to catch up with him, but I don't think I ever will, Reverend Dyson. He's always a man on the move. He's awesome. And when you hear him, you'll understand why. Let us receive the esteemed, the honorable, the venerable USA Chairman of the Universal Peace Federation, Reverend Dr. Michael W. Jenkins. Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Archbishop Stallings. We really appreciate your leadership and your love for all people. I know you grew up in New Bern, North Carolina, and was raised by a very loving mother and father. And also your grandmother helped you go to the Baptist church and become an evangelical Catholic preacher. You've never let us understand anything about love of God. And I want to commend all the faith leaders here, Dr. Marcia Dyson and Captain Orlando Lilly, Dr. Ward also as a teacher and professor and president of the university, and also to Rabbi Luft, who's our dear friend and brother in Jerusalem. We want you to be part of the Interreligious Association for Peace and Development, our sponsor today. We need you. We need your leadership as faith leaders. We found that faith leaders have a dimension of understanding, and also if they practice that understanding, love other people, we can go across every kind of barrier. Archbishop Stallings and I had the blessing of going to Jerusalem over 46 times and working in Jordan, Lebanon, and also Palestine and the north of Israel. Rabbi Luft, really love your work because we are family, and faith leaders know there is a higher dimension, our Creator God, and we do need some understanding. Dr. Cromwell, you touched on a point where we need understanding. We need to understand other people. That's a first thing. And we also have to understand God. And the first thing that came to me was to understand that God does love everybody. And also, it's kind of a big step for a lot of Christians to come to the place where they know God loves the Hindus, God loves the Muslims, God loves everybody, but not just at a distance, but even as their creator, and also they're all in all. And I think that understanding, it really got to me when I was in Al-Aqsa Mosque many times. I felt the love from the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Rabbi Hussein. And we were welcomed there, Rabbi Luft, as you would be too, if we went together. And the Quran has in the third surah a beautiful verse about people of the book come together and know that we should only love one God. And John 14:2 really touches me, Archbishop Stallings. Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many mansions. Growing up as a Methodist, I always thought those many mansions were different denominations in one house. That changed now. God changed my perspective by going to the Holy Land, that there is only one house, God's house. And the mansions are for everybody of every background. And God is working with all of us. And when religious leaders come together with that understanding, we can go anywhere. We went into the Gaza Strip so many times. Yes, it was dangerous, but actually, I found when you go as a faith leader, you don't actually stir up the wrong things in people. You're looking to help them, no matter what. You're looking to help them discover love, God, and strengthen family. And finally, I was so moved when I was at the Western Wall, Rabbi Luft. It's one of the holy places of the whole world. What amazed me there was, Archbishop, you remember, we could go to the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall of prayer, the holy place, and we were welcome there. All the rabbis are praying there, men on one side, women on the other. But we are welcome. There's a feeling of welcome. There's a feeling of joy that other people are coming in. And I was so moved, and I wonder, how is this that these rabbis are so embracing to us? There was no energy of rejection or anything. We were welcome there. And again, it goes back to God. It goes back to what God says. It's in the book. It's in the Quran that we are people of the book. We should respect one another. It's in the gospel that we should really understand. Many mansions in my Father's house. I mean, God's got a lot of stuff going on, Captain Lily, as you know. We got to be open to see that God's working everywhere, not just in our family. And finally, Isaiah 57 is on one of the cornerstones of the entry gate to the Western Wall. Isaiah 56:7. And my house shall be a house of prayer for all people. Then I understood, Dr. Dyson. Once a religious leader understands God's views, my house is a house of prayer for all people. Wow. Then it gets set in our hearts. And if we practice that, religious leaders are the only real way that we can open up the doors to all families, races, communities. It was Dr. King that set things in motion, and he didn't do it out of fear. He did it out of knowing God, loving his enemy, and teaching us how to live one another. My brother, Bishop Stallings, I am your family. I don't feel any distance from Bishop Stallings, but it wasn't like, oh, I just realized that from God, and then we just got together and became family. No, there were a lot of tears down the road. There were a lot of struggles. There's a lot of misunderstanding. I want to say my brother, Archbishop Stallings, never, ever gave up on me because he really wanted to please God. And because of that, I had a chance to grow. I thank you, Bishop Stallings. I thank all of you are doing this. Captain Lily, God bless your work. Dr. Dyson, Dr. Alex Cromwell, Dr. Ward, thank you all. Thank you all. We're so grateful for this. Rabbi Luft, I'll see you soon. God bless.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. Well said. We turn it back over to our host for today, Mrs. Tomiko Duggan. Also thanking Mr. William Stoner, who serves as a UPF executive, for handling those questions. But now, the floor is yours, Mrs. Tomiko Duggan.
Thank you so much, Archbishop Stallings, our chairman for IAPD. I truly, truly appreciate for your important role. And Dr. Hakja Hamoon, who inaugurated IAPD, believes in religious community, faith leaders. You are really called by God and to play vital role in bringing a world of lasting peace. I believe so. So our founder, Moon, known as a Mother of Peace, has so much hope and trust in you. So we look forward to working with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Dr. Cromwell, Captain.
What an awesome panel. What an awesome.
Very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Good job, Archbishop Stallings, as always.
Looking forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.